Hate to interrupt. We are at
Okay,
7. I'm
yeah, we
starting
got
the
to go.
social media.
We got to
We're going
start
to let
this.
everybody in. Here, let me start the music and we'll let everybody in.
Oh, let me. Hey, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Veterans Breakfast Club. I am Todd DiPastino, the Executive Director of the Veterans Breakfast Club. We have conversations about the military experience, past and present, every week here. And tonight, in honor of our guest, I wear my 40-year-old Letterman's jacket from Mount Lebanon High School because our guest, Brian O'Hare, grew up right down the street from me, right down the road from me, just a few miles from my house where I grew up. And yet he went to the rival high school and he was a football player. And he writes about it in his wonderful collection of short stories, Surrender. Brian, how are you?
I'm doing great, thank you. I'm right now in Los Angeles. It's 102 degrees, and I have, like a lot of people in LA, I have no air conditioning. So basically, I'm sitting in my darkened easy bake oven of a house. And what goes better with 102 degrees and no air conditioning than a cup of hot black coffee?
Hot
So
coffee.
yeah.
So is this Letterman's jacket triggering to you, Brian?
Actually, it is. I think I'm going to need to go to my safe place and repeat some foul language. Take it off,
Yeah, I'm
Pastino.
taking it off because it's too hot in here.
And
But
now you're wearing your Mount Lebanon t-shirt underneath.
yeah, it's like,
Take that off too.
yeah, we don't want to horrify the audience. Football is such a big part of your book and it's a big part of your story, but I should let people know that you're a Marine, Naval Academy graduate, grew up in the Pittsburgh area. And, I think most people here on this program know that I'm not a veteran and I haven't served. And I don't come from a military family. But I have spent the past 16 years being a close observer of the Homo militaris, I guess you would call it,
Yeah.
the people, the tribe who has served in the military. And there's no more fascinating sub-tribe, I think, than Marines. Marines are really special people. And this is not a setup for a joke, Brad Washabaugh, so don't worry about that. They are they're special. It's like when somebody enters the Marine Corps, it's like they enter a white hot furnace and they get transformed by it in really fascinating ways and often unpredictable ways and maybe even eccentric ways. And I think Brian O'Hare kind of fits that bill. He's a writer, he's a filmmaker, he's a Gulf War veteran, he was a Marine Corps officer, and he's an intensely creative and observant, I think, student of American culture and society. And so, where his book Surrender certainly charts in short story form, and here it is, uh, his experiences in the Marine Corps and in Operation Desert Shield and Desert Storm, it also spends a lot of time kind of analyzing the Marine Corps ethic, the Marine Corps mythos, the Marine Corps myth that he likens the Marine Corps to a religion, and I think there's a lot to that. It's certainly a powerful subculture, and it's one that had a great sway, and I think still has a great sway, Brian would say, over his own personality and character. Before we get to Brian and start interrogating him about his book and about his service, I do want to embarrass him here with just a couple of these
Please
wonderful
do.
endorsements of the book. Phil Klay, who's a wonderful writer, a Marine himself, said, Surrender is written in a delightful, incisive prose bursting with humanity. It is deeply observed and emotionally powerful, sharp on both the cultural mores of young men and on the deeper consequences of what happens when that mixes with American military power. And each story boasts richly imagined characters that live on in the mind long after you've finished reading. I would absolutely agree with every word there. Anthony Swafford, author of Jarhead, said O'Hare is a real deal storyteller. From suburban sports fields to overseas Marine Corps bases to the fields of combat, he expertly dissects the complications of boyhood, manhood, and military service. Unabashedly emotional and deeply human, surrender beautifully orchestrates the art of war and warriors. And I think that's one of the things that makes Marines fascinating to me is they have enormous courage. And I mean that not just in the sense of like physical courage, maybe on the battlefield, but they're also, so many of them are so remarkably courageous with their emotions and with their observations, and they are often great truth tellers. And I'm so interested to about where that all comes from and how that evolved in Brian. But I do want to, before we get started, say hello to Sean. Hi, Sean. How are you?
Very good. How's everyone doing tonight? Great to see you all.
And I want to say hi to Ben Wright, our board member emeritus and one of our great counselors and former chair of our program committee. Hello, Ben.
Well, good evening, and I have a very important announcement to make this evening. Our guest Brian O'Hare probably knows who Larry Richard is, who does a morning program on KDKA radio, and each year he honors hometown heroes. And one of the five that's being honored this year for doing significant things that influence the community and make it better is our own Todd DiPastino, who is CEO of the Veterans Breakfast Club.
Woo! Yay!
Congratulations,
Thank
Todd.
you.
And they're
Thank
going to
you.
have a big dinner at Lamont Restaurant, which is a very posh place on Mount Washington that overlooks the point on the evening of October the 8th. And I'll put the website link in the chat if anybody, particularly in the Pittsburgh area, would like to go and be part of honoring Todd. You can buy a ticket. I'll warn you, they don't give them away, and participate in it. But it should be a wonderful evening, and especially support Todd and all the wonderful things he does for us. So thank you, Todd.
Thank you, Ben. And I'll also say that on that at that event on October 8th, if you attend, you'll get to meet Jim Leland, the legendary Pirates baseball manager, is also being honored that night. I'm very grateful for the nomination. Don Nemchek was behind the nomination. That's the only reason I think I was selected, and I'm so honored by it, and know that it's good for the Veterans Breakfast Club, and it's good for people to know that these stories here that we hear aren't just for veterans. I think they're for everybody, and that's the message. If they let me speak at that event, that's the message I will be sending. Hello, Don. Thank you so much for that nomination. You are so kind.
Well, it was an easy choice for me to make, Todd. I won't embarrass you by a lot of platitudes. You'll hear enough of those. We all thought you were picking up the tab for the table, though. But no, in all seriousness, it was heartfelt from me, and I speak for other veterans on this on our committees and on this call. What you do for us is something we'll never forget and is deeply appreciated. And I think that is going to manifest itself in October. So I'm looking forward to the dinner and certainly being there for you at your celebration.
Thank you, Don. And it's absolutely true. I mean, every week when I come and join all of you and we share these stories, I grow, I learn. It's such a important part of my life. It's been the joy of my life. I mean, I raised two wonderful children who are now adults and out of the house. And, next to that, this has been absolutely the most fulfilling, joyful, wonderful, inspiring educational experience I've ever had. And I continue to learn and just love the conversations that we have. And I'll just segue then into our conversation with Brian O'Hare, a Gulf War Marine. Brian, I feel so connected to your work because I envy the writing, but also because, we grew up, I'm your age exactly. We went to high school, at the same time, right down the road from each other. But your life took a turn that my life didn't take. You ended up in the Marine Corps. Could you let people know how that happened? I mean, it seems like you were absolutely destined to be a Marine. There was no way around it.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think destined is a great way of putting it. I mean, I was raised basically to be a Marine. Basically, my story goes back to my father, who is fictionalized in the book Surrender. But my father was this big, swaggering, silver-tongued New York Irishman who was like equal parts Jackie Gleason and, like spaghetti Western era Clint Eastwood all rolled into one. And, there's a friend of ours from Upper St. Clair. My father sadly died in 1998 at age 56 from Agent Orange related prostate cancer. And this friend of ours from my class had said basically, and over the course of, so I'm going to use some salty language. I'm just going to give my one caveat right now. But my friend had said, he goes, your dad was the shit, and everyone knew it. And that was a very accurate and succinct way of putting it, because my dad was the shit. He was a super cool guy. Anyway, he flew Marine F-4 Phantoms in Vietnam, flew 307 missions. Wasn't enough to just fly 307 missions. He got shot down on his last one, the mission he wasn't supposed to fly. And, even more than that, his canopy wouldn't open. He was the backseat guy, the NFO Rio, and he had to take his K-bar out to pry the canopy from the fuselage, and the canopy blew, and he went into Da Nang Harbor where two sailors from the USS Matthews picked him up, and he broke his back and had back problems, 8 back operations until he died. So growing up as somebody that was like so larger than life, I mean, he was like somebody from a movie,
Yeah.
like, again, Clint Eastwood and Dirty Harry. He was always the guy, did I fire five shots or 6 shots? Do you feel lucky, punk? Like my dad would have been totally natural saying that. But he was a good guy though, too. He was always like, he hated bullies. And he was way ahead of his time, I think, in so many ways. I think what we would talk about now is like we would call it like social justice or whatever. To my dad, it was just a matter of like, wait a minute, that's not fair.
Yeah.
This is fair, and because I'm 6'4" and 270 pounds, and as you alluded to, not only having physical courage, but having that sort of, shall we say, like moral courage as well,
Yes.
to stand up for what's right and against bullies. I mean, I I wanted to be him. I didn't want to be just like him. I wanted to be him. I wanted that magic.
Yeah.
And part of getting that magic was becoming a Marine, to be able to call myself that. And, my father went to NYU, which is a great school, but to him, and this is where we start to get, we as parents start to get into, I think probably like thin ice a little bit, is where we start to sort of dictate our kids' lives. And I'm probably guilty of it too. I have a 21-year-old and a 16-year-old. For my father, going to the Naval Academy, the man factory, as he called it, where they produce men, was what somebody who was his son would do. And of course, before this, I played football. I don't know how many of us are here from Western Pennsylvania, but certainly when Todd and I were in high school, the early 80s, I mean, that was the benchmark for masculinity and, iconic, American iconic American manhood. And I was the captain of the Upper St. Clair football team. We were always nationally ranked in the USA Today top 25. So again, it was almost like checking these boxes off of like, yep. It was like this, like almost like training for this eventuality of becoming a Marine. And, the first steps with that were football on the fields of Western Pennsylvania, going to the Naval Academy, playing football for the Naval Academy, which as I alluded to, I did for, barely a year because I was too small, not good enough. And then, of course, what do? You don't go into the Navy, you go into the Marine Corps. And I spent 6 years in the Marine Corps after that, with an infantry battalion, I was a supply officer for the infantry battalion, but again, it's like a, again, it's a cult in a way, a religion, and a Marine infantry battalion is almost sort of like a fiefdom. And the battalion commander is he's the, whoever, I don't know, he's
The Lord.
The Lord, exactly. And we're serfs, and no more so than in my battalion. It was crazy. It was Machiavellian. He turned all the officers against each other. Anyway, yes.
Well, I'm gonna halt you there and go back and just ask you simply, did your father tell many war stories?
Actually, he didn't, but it was interesting though. It's a really good question because again, I'm 58. I've outlived my father now by 2 years. So there's a lot of stuff that I think I understand about my father, and I understand about being a man of a certain age, being a father. And I've studied my father a lot. I mean, again, he has a character in the book. It's not him specifically, but it's based on him. He very much created, well, the thing I'm fascinated most about is mythologies. And everything that I just talked about that you alluded to as well, all have to do with mythologies. And I would say that I'm going to guess, but anybody that's sitting here right now, on this Zoom call, was attracted to the military by the mythology first, whether it was a family member, whether it was a neighbor, a friend, something they read about in a book, whether it was Audie Murphy or I don't know, a commercial they saw on TV. All that stuff plays to the mythology. And two, so does, again, that's where, again, football, particularly when we were, playing and when we were in Western Pennsylvania, and especially, again, in Western Pennsylvania, I mean, I'll talk to people. Again, I live in Los Angeles. There's people here from everywhere, and they're like, oh, well, yeah, in Nebraska, we love our high school football. It's like, yeah, I get it, but in Western Pennsylvania, football it's other. It does approach something like a religion, or however you want to call it, the way that the way that it's reported on in the media. So again, that was a huge mythology. Pittsburgh itself, people hear that I'm from Pittsburgh out here and immediately conjures up something because of the Steelers.
Yeah.
And because of so many things. I mean, Pittsburgh, I like to say, punches above its weight in so many ways as a city. As a city of what? It's like 350,000 people now.
Yeah, not even.
I mean, that's the size of Bakersfield, California.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the city of Long Beach has 500,000 people in it. I mean, nobody even talks about Bakersfield unless you're talking about Buck Owens, who I love, or Merle Haggard.
Mm-hmm.
But as a city, it's just a lot of people living in one place. But Pittsburgh has this hold on people's imaginations because of its mythology, whether it's because of the Carnegies, the Mellons, Frick, the Homestead Steel Strike, the birth of the American labor movement. I mean, or Warhol even. So, I mean, all this stuff is about mythology. The Naval Academy has a huge mythology. And, and honestly, there's no mythology that rivals that of the United States military. All the services have a profound mythology. And as you pointed out, again, I'm biased because I'm a Marine, but the Marine Corps has the mythology that approaches that of a religion, I think, and it consciously plays that up. It sells transformation. That was a great word that you used.
Well, and Brian, I'm sorry, I'll just interrupt again.
Sure.
I mean, when you enter a convent, or a seminary, when you enter the priesthood or become a monk, historically, you do have to strip yourself of your worldly identity, and you have to, be kind of broken down and then built back up. And that happens in boot camp, correct?
Absolutely. And I mean, I think all militaries have that understanding and do that, whether you're in the, whatever, the French military or the British military or whatever. But I would say, again, America has this, has the biggest mythology of all. And our military has, we created the gold standard for militaries. And so our boot camps are a process of being reborn in a way. But only the Marine Corps transforms you into something forever, which I'm fascinated by because I've heard it described as we make the lie come true. Because if you think about it, I'm just, I don't know how many Marines we have here, but we're just people who are mortal people who get arthritis, who have, who worry about, whatever, and that we're all going to die someday. But we all collectively have sort of bought into this lie or this mythology that we are Marines, and everybody believes it. Even, again, my neighbors here in LA are just like, well, yeah, you're a Marine. They don't, you know what I mean? They just accept it as a truth. And it's
Okay, I mean, what I'm hearing when you're using the word, lie and myth, that sounds like disillusioned. In many respects, maybe a disillusioned Marine. Myth, Brian, I think of myth as being a two-sided thing.
yeah,
On the one side, a myth is part of this, eternal archetype that we all respond to. It gives your life purpose.
sure.
It can help guide you through a life of purpose and meaning. Um, but if you take it too literally, it could become the lie. It could become, all that you are. And it sounds like, that's been a fine line in your life.
Oh, absolutely. Because it's again, I always like to say I'm a true believer. And again, using kind of like religious terms. But again, I'm a 58-year-old man who's been around the block more than a few times. I'm a father, all sorts of stuff. I've been, in my 30 seconds or 2 minutes of combat or whatever, enough to feel very sorry for myself. Um, and, I'm very proud of that. I'm very proud of all that stuff I just talked about, being a Pittsburgher, playing football in Pittsburgh, going to the Naval Academy, being a Marine, being a father. But it's, if we don't, you know what I mean? Like if you don't have sort of like a well-rounded view of it, it's weird.
A critical view.
A critical view, yeah.
And I think that's it. And by critical, we don't mean negative or condemning view, but you're able to step back and look at it and analyze what makes a Marine. Let me ask you this, Brian.
Sure.
Did you like the Naval Academy?
Oh, okay. Wow. You're a perfect straight man, Todd. This is awesome because it's one of these things I always say. I did not like the Naval Academy. I hated the Naval Academy. I did not like the Marine Corps. I hated the Marine Corps. Here's what I loved, though. I loved midshipmen. I loved my classmates. I loved Marines. I do love Marines. I love my Marines that again that I served with. I talked to them like I talked to one of them like 2 days ago. I've been out of the Marine Corps now for 30 years. And I have to say that, it's that old cliche is they gave me way more than I ever gave them. They taught me so much more about the world coming from my very sheltered, very privileged existence at good old Upper St. Clair. Again, Upper St. Clair is a great place. The schools were terrific. My football coach is great. The teachers were wonderful. But it was a very privileged bubble. And my Marines gave me so much love. That's the only way to describe it. And that was a lot. So I loved that part of it, but I hated the Marine Corps.
Brian, I write nonfiction. I'm a historian. I wrote a biography of Bill Mauldin. I don't know if you know who he
Of
was.
course,
He was a cartoonist from World War II cartoonist. And right when the book came out, it was his biography. And if anybody knows Bill Mauldin, they know that his cartoons, he did about 700 of them during World War II. He was an infantryman himself in the 45th Infantry Division in Europe. And his cartoons are very dark, very sardonic, very critical of the army. He always complained about the army. He thought that the commanders generally were bad, and there were a few good ones. The food was bad, all the conditions were bad. He hated the army in many senses. But what I couldn't understand when I worked on the book, and this is before the Veterans Breakfast Club, before I got to know veterans, is studying his character. All he did is gripe about the army. But in the end, at the end of his life, when he didn't even recognize his family anymore, all he wanted was to be around Army veterans.
Yeah.
And he loved his fellow veterans, like with a depth of soul that he didn't even show off to his own family. And that always puzzled me so much, how he could love the Army and hate the Army so much at the same time. And one of our veterans in the Veterans Breakfast Club years later said, well, do you really like every member of your family? And you think about cousins or aunts or uncles, and you realize, like, no, but they're your family, and
Yeah.
they're a part of you, and you have to accept even parts of yourself that you don't necessarily like, and that's kind of what his relationship with the Army was. And I'm going on about this just because I get that sense in your book too, that same ambivalence, we might call it, toward the Marine Corps.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great word. I mean, I love it. Well, I mean, it's been amazing, like with my kids who came along after I'd been out of the Marine Corps for like 10, 12 years. So they never had like a direct experience of it, but they're very aware of it. And I mean, whether it's me wearing something that has a Marine Corps emblem on it and having like a kid, basically like a 20-year-old come up to me like in a restaurant and start talking to me and get into a very intense conversation for 45 seconds and then hugging each other. And then particularly when my kids were younger, they were like, was that a friend of yours?
Like, who is that guy? Yeah. Oh yeah. It's
And I'll
amazing.
say,
Yeah.
I have no idea who that was. And I mean, that's happened in so many different forms and the countless times. And I love that. And I love the way it transcends generations. Again, that the whole thing about the Marine Corps birthday where the youngest Marine and the oldest Marine gets the first piece of cake.
Yeah.
It's brilliant. It's genius. And the fact that I had an opportunity a very long time ago to interview the actor Harvey Keitel, who was a Marine, like in the 50s. He was in Lebanon. And he's very outspoken about being a Marine. I think he's quite old now, and I'm not sure how or what he's doing now. But we sat down at the end of the table. A friend of mine was actually conducting the interview. I just wanted to talk to him about being a Marine. And I didn't say much, but it was great because he would punctuate something he was saying and he would point to me and he would say, look, he goes, I don't know your friend Brian here. He goes, but I know something about Brian because of who he is, because he's a Marine. And again, for it to cross over this huge gulf, here's this movie star, and here I am, just some like, whatever, middle-aged kid at the time. It's kind of magic. And I really love that. And, there's millions of reasons. Here's something that makes you feel old. The Commandant was my XO at H&S Company. He's a great guy, Commandant Smith, right now in the Marine Corps. My XO, terrific guy. And I saw him when I was at Annapolis the last time in May, and I gave him a copy of the book. And I don't know. I mean, I just love being able to say that, like, the Pope is my friend.
Yeah.
Pope of the Marine Corps.
He's the Pope of the Marine Corps, right?
Yeah. And
exactly
I told him too. I've told both. I've met two commandants, him and the one, and it was Neller. I met him at a change of command ceremony party, and I'd had about 4 beers already and maybe some bourbon. And as you can tell, I have no problem saying things, but you put 4 beers and a shot of bourbon into me, and I have less trouble saying things. And I had my friend, my Naval Academy classmate who just retired as a 2-star general in the Marine Corps, this guy Sparky Renforth, who you should absolutely, he's from Wheeling, should absolutely have him on sometime. He just retired. He's a killer. He's a legend. He's amazing. So we're in the backyard and I was like, hey, Spark, I said, you got to introduce me to the Commandant. He's like, oh, sure. So I meet him, and first thing out of my mouth was like, sir, I said, this is like meeting the Pope. And he just looks at me. He doesn't miss a beat. He goes, I am the Pope. And immediately, inwardly, I'm starting to lose consciousness. And then he just picks it up. He goes, I speak to God every day. And of course, I'm like, at this point, I'm just like done because I know who he's going to say. He goes, I speak to Chesty Puller every day. And like that blew me away because here I am again. At the time I was working on the book, I'm just sitting there sweating in my garage. Nobody cares. I'm just tapping away,
Yeah.
thinking about these things. Here's the commandant of the Marine Corps saying, validating everything
Yes.
that I think about. It made me think like I am on the right path in telling this story.
Well, we don't have the Pope of the Marine Corps, but we do have an Archbishop here. That is retired Colonel Brad Washabaugh. He's with us. He's a board member, Veterans Breakfast Club board member. So I'm going to expect him to chime in or ask a question anytime. But I want to remind people, this is your book, Surrender. I highly, highly recommend reading it. It is, boy, Brian, you're going to hate me saying this, but it is kind of to the Gulf War generation what Tim O'Brien's The Things They Carried
Wow.
is to the Vietnam generation. It's a Marine version of it. It is a lot more on the home front and kind of what makes a Marine and what sends a Marine off to war. But it's that loose collection of short stories that are interrelated that is so wonderful to behold. Brian, this is your unit in Kuwait, Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, that's let's see. I'm the guy. Let's see. There's a black Marine with a mustache. Kind of looks handsome, looks like Billy D. Williams there, right in the middle.
Oh, yes. Yes.
I'm right to his right.
Here, right here.
Yeah. No,
Okay.
I used to have a big handlebar mustache, but then like the 1 second after the war was over, the XO came up to me, not the guy that's the commandant now, but the battalion XO. And he's like, why don't you trim up that mustache, Lieutenant? And it was like, we were right back at it. The
That was
Marine
it.
Corps eating its young. So I shaved it off.
Tell me about the war. I mean, well, just tell me about your experience with the Gulf War.
Well, just out of curiosity, how much time do we have because I have like so much to say and I just want to make.
Okay, I'll be good about butting in
Okay.
to keep things moving along. Let's just say that. Just don't be offended if I interrupt you.
Absolutely not. But it's
Oh,
interesting because
I'm sorry, I'm going to say one more thing. I want to invite people to raise their hands. You could wave your
absolutely.
hand in front of the screen. You could raise your electronic hand. We do want to make this interactive. As you can see, Brian is kind of a wallflower, so you're going to have to draw him out. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you very much for that, Todd. Thank you for advocating for me. And actually, too, when I do this stuff in general, I like to think of it as almost like a conversation because I can keep the thing going easily enough. But I like questions, and I think again, if we're all having a conversation,
Yeah.
that's totally cool. The only reason I bring that up too is that because I've been to Saudi Arabia twice. I went the first time in 1991 as part of the 2nd Battalion, 3rd Marine Regiment. I was stationed at Marine Corps Air Station, Kaneohe Bay, Hawaii. I don't think there's infantry there anymore, but there was always, the 3rd Marine Regiment, and we were deployed to Okinawa for 6 months, and then we went to the Persian Gulf in January of 91, and we were there for another 5 months. But then also this past January, I drove across Saudi Arabia. That's me. That's actually on the highway of death in Kuwait, on the way from, thank you, Don. When you drive from Kuwait City to the border with Iraq, this is actually the highway that Iraq invaded Kuwait City on, and then, we trapped them on the way back. And absolutely fascinating trip. I drove from Jeddah on the Red Sea, which is the southeastern part of the country, the number 2 city in Saudi Arabia, all the way to Kafji, which is right on the border with Kuwait on the Arabian Gulf, as they would call it, or the Persian Gulf. They don't like calling it the Persian Gulf because they don't like Iran, and the Iranians don't like them. But and then we flew to Kuwait City and then spent 4 or 5 days in Kuwait City and drove to the Iraqi border. It was interesting because my first experience going into Saudi Arabia, like it sucked. We were in what I've discovered is by far the ugliest part of Saudi Arabia. It's flat and crunchy and kind of marshy. I mean, it's a really beautiful country. I mean, we went to there's at Al Ula, which is like this Nabatean society that, you know, is like 2,000 years old, where they carved these beautiful, you know, dwellings into temples. It looks, you know, looks like you're in like the Grand Canyon or something. So I had this completely different experience. We spent all of our time when I was in the Marine Corps, basically at this place called Manifa. We went north for the ground invasion just outside of Kafji. I was outside of Kafji when that was going on, which was, again, one of those, like, you know, life-changing experiences, probably in retrospect, you know, probably not in that much danger, but when somebody fires a couple rockets at you the first couple times, I mean, it's like, whoa, you know, you kind of, it, you know, you think, poor me. You know, I felt very sorry for myself for about 10 minutes, until I was like, well, hold on, buddy. You know, like, you thought the Naval Academy was cool. You thought, you know, the Marine Corps was cool. Now's when you don't get to choose. And
Well,
go ahead.
you know, and Brian, and I'm curious about this. I've heard from our Vietnam vets that, you know, when Vietnam came along, their fathers had served in World War II. This was going to be their war.
Yeah.
Your father was this great hero from Vietnam.
Yeah.
Was there any part of you that thought, like, okay, this is my chance?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Because I think, you know, it's sort of like, you know, very much these experiences that we have in combat or in proximity to combat are very much before and after kind of experiences, and very much be careful what you wish for kind of experiences. I think there's a lot of naivete that this is my war. But like I said, growing up with my father, he very consciously sort of like hyped up in a way his own mythology, his personal mythology, which was considerable. You know, we go back to the beginning of the talk. He was the shit, and everybody knew it, and nobody knew it better than me. I was his chosen one. It's crazy. Like, I have a brother too, who's a year younger than me. Was the captain of the Upper St. Clair basketball team, went to the Naval Academy. But guess what? We don't really play basketball in Western Pennsylvania, or at least we don't respect it as much as the people who play football.
No, we don't.
So nobody cares. It's just a sad fact. My brother played a sport that nobody cares. And guess what? My father kind of didn't care. My brother went to the Naval Academy, but he became a Seabee. I know we got a Seabee on here somewhere. I loved Seabees. Yeah, can do. Like, I'm fascinated by Seabees. There's a recurring character, as you'll see in the book. There's a Seabee character in a great uncle from the Pacific, and he's going to appear in more stuff down the line. In Uncle Eddie, so fascinating, and part of it is because of his being a Seabee. But my brother went to the Naval Academy, and then went to Port Hueneme, and then went to El Toro when that still existed, and then retired like in Ventura County near Hueneme. Or he didn't retire. He's just a guy who got out of the Navy. And poor guy, because my father didn't give a shit. And guess what? My brother knew that. My brother's a really good guy. He's a good father. He served honorably and well, but he was just a dude who was in the Navy for a while. I'm a Marine.
He dodged it. He dodged in the sense that he dodged the myth that you're talking about, being
Absolutely.
captured by it, you
Absolutely.
know, and then something then you have to escape. I mean, he was never captured by it, so he was able to live his life that he wanted. Did your dad have any, and I want to go to Brad, did your dad have any advice before you went off to war?
No, he actually didn't. Yeah, it was weird. My relationship with my dad was really weird. Again, in some way, he was like Dr. Frankenstein, and I was his monster, for better or for worse. He saw me in a way as almost like his creation. And I get that. I think all of us as parents, we kind of see our kids as improved versions of ourselves, because I'll just speak for myself. My kids are so much smarter than my wife and I. And I'm a smart guy, and my wife is brilliant, but our kids are smarter. Um, we've been on the planet longer, so experience-wise, I know some stuff. So I don't know. I had a very complicated relationship with my dad. I think it's a certain point in my sort of curiosity for asking questions, this mythology. I think it freaked him out a little bit. And he actually stopped talking to me for 5 years before he died.
Mm.
And as I went to Bethesda Naval Hospital to basically spend the last 2 months of his life with him, essentially wiping his ass for 2 months, happy to do so, honored to do so. He hadn't talked to me for 5 years before that. And we didn't quite reconcile it. All he said was, for one point, as I was helping him to the bathroom when he could still get out of the bed, here's this guy, 6'4", probably at this time 300 pounds, and very unsteady on his feet. And I'm 5'11" and 3/4, 170 pounds, and he's hanging on me. And he said, apropos of nothing, no context, maybe you just went further than me. And he had it, and I think it was there's a kind of poetic or poetry to that. And I understood what he meant. And I said, yeah, maybe. And that's all we talked about it. And then he died.
I saw Rich Kensinger kind of shake his head like this when you mentioned about what you project on your children. I do think it's a trap that parents get into. I certainly have that experience, both as a parent and as a child. And you do have to guard against projecting things onto your children. And that sounds like it happened to you. Brad Washaball, how are you tonight?
Well, hello. This is a great to have you on, Brian. We have
Thank you,
so many
sir.
common threads here. I'm born in Mount Lebanon, raised in Pittsburgh, and I was thinking last week I was with a reunion with my rifle company, India 3-3, there in
All
Quantico.
right, third Marines.
Over 40 years ago, we had a group come together and we picked right up and had our battalion commander, General Sheehan, join us for lunch. And we went out to the Marine Museum there, and it was a fantastic trip. So a lot of that resonates with me. I have to ask you what unit you were with in Desert Storm.
Oh, I was with 2-3, H&S Company 2-3.
Okay.
So yeah, third Marines.
Was that Task Force Taro?
Yeah, that was Taro. Yes.
Okay, I was in Task Force Grizzly. I was the OPSO of 3rd Battalion, 7th Marines.
Awesome.
And so we shared the battlefield together. But I have to get back and ask you why you hated the Naval Academy, why you hated the Marine Corps. Was there something specific in those institutions that struck that reaction from you?
Absolutely. Well, yeah, I think as someone who went in with a true believer in the mythology, and my father, who is a terrific leader and who really imbued me with a strong expectation of what leadership is, a very strong idea of that you take care of your Marines, and that it is almost a sort of a holy duty that you have, an obligation. To find myself both at the Naval Academy and the Marine Corps, to find so many officers who were really, only concerned about their own careers in so many ways. And this was a time when it was, they were, riffing officers out, and there was like this competition to stay in if you're a reserve officer. It was humiliating in a lot of ways. There was a perfect example. Again, this battalion commander that I had at the time, I had the number 2 supply account in the 3rd Marine Division while we were on deployment to Okinawa. And whatever, without going into all the details of this thing, the battalion was at Camp Fuji to do training. I was preparing the battalion to get ready to go to the Persian Gulf, summoned to Camp Fuji by the battalion commander, and basically locked up in front of his desk with the door open so all the battalion staff, all the enlisted could hear him chew my ass out for 45 minutes. And, you know, everybody knowing what was going on. And that was just, you know, that was one of the more egregious examples of that. So, I mean, like, just leadership was particularly disappointing, I found. Of course, I had some good leadership too. The senior Marine who was at the Naval Academy was the legendary Colonel Ripley, who blew up the bridge at Dong Ha. Um, and it's interesting too, because I went to Vietnam twice doing this documentary. Basically, you know, if I was going to sort of demythologize my father, I needed to go to the place where a part of the mythology was created. And certainly that was Vietnam for me, whether it was Chu Lai or Hue or, all these places. And I went through this great company because you need basically a fixer. It's called military history tours or historical tours. They were wonderful. And this guy, he was a retired Marine captain, but spent most of his time as a gunnery sergeant. This guy, Ed Garr, Garr, was in Korea and in Vietnam, wounded 5 times. I can't remember, it was 3 times in Korea, twice in Vietnam, or reverse. Man, probably one of the coolest guys I've ever met in my entire life. He's sort of like Popeye in a way, that kind of like a rah, rah. He was from Brooklyn. And when he was born during Prohibition, his grandmother would sell bootleg liquor that she would make from his baby carriage as she would push him around Cortelyou Road in Brooklyn. And so he very much had this in him. His people skills were off the charts. Everywhere we went in Vietnam on both trips, we would stop on the side of a highway, like the Hai Van Pass or whatever, and kids on, mopeds would recognize him and stop to say hello. I mean, here we are in the middle of Vietnam. He was amazing, but it was great. Again, back to Colonel Ripley's great leadership and his reputation. Ed Garr was no fool. He wanted to check out who this guy O'Hare was. And he said, I found out you were one of Ripley's Marines. Mrs. Ripley had given me my first set of second lieutenant bars engraved. They by far and away were the exception. Everybody else fell very much short of that. I found that the Naval Academy and the Marine Corps was not interested in taking the strengths that I had as a leader. They were more in using those strengths to further, mission accomplishment. But, they were going to break you. And they were going to jam, your square peg into the round hole. And that if you didn't fit, that was too bad for you. And that philosophy, was permeated everywhere. The Naval Academy was not a positive place. I had classmates of mine, female classmates, who were raped, who the Naval Academy and the, NCIS did nothing about, who blamed them. I found, again, in general, the leadership to be very lacking, and that was disheartening.
Well, the one good thing about the military, if you have a less than good leader, you can wait until the next one comes around, and usually you win by the law of averages. I found out in 29 years in the Marine Corps. So you do, yeah.
But no, I'm sorry to cut you off, but I mean, unfortunately for me, there was going to be I was not going to stay around for 29 years because I was supposed to be a storyteller. And, this is what I was supposed to do. And the path I was supposed to take was through, I didn't know it at the time, but, the Naval Academy and the Marine Corps gave me a lifetime. It again, as Todd pointed out, it transformed me, and it transformed the way that I see the world. Again, if I'd just been some guy who stayed in Upper St. Clair and, went to a very good school someplace and then got a good job on Wall Street or something, I would have had a very skewed view of what America was about. And the Marine Corps in the Naval Academy too, showed me this beautiful part of this beautiful side of America that I actually don't even think that the Naval Academy and the Marine Corps realizes that they possess. And I think part of what I want to do as a storyteller is to show that, because I don't think it's celebrated really enough by the Navy and the Marine Corps. I'm doing this documentary right now too, which everybody should watch. It's called Cannon Shot. It's about the world's largest croquet match between the US Naval Academy, and their across the street neighbor, St. John's College. St. John's College is the third oldest school in America. It's Harvard, William and Mary, St. John's. It's been around since 1696. There is zero interaction between the two schools 364 days out of the year, except for one Saturday in April, where since 1983, they play croquet against each other. And at its height before COVID, 10,000 people showed up. By comparison, the Croquet World Championships might have 500 people at it, and that includes the two teams playing. So this match dwarfs, the biggest game in croquet. What's interesting about it is that these two schools seemingly represent opposite ends of the philosophical spectrum. Obviously, on the far right is the US Naval Academy, arguably the world's greatest military academy. Arguably, on the far left, again, obviously, is St. John's College, based on the Great Books program. They have no exams. They have no grades. They have no professors. They have tutors because the books are the professors. Aristotle, whoever, Plato, Tolstoy. So these two schools lend themselves to stereotyping so much. And part of it, I have to say, on the Naval Academy side, is because we're jealous. We look, the Naval Academy's approach to education is they open up the top of your head and then they jackhammer information in. And then they'll throw a piece of paper in front of you, and then you vomit up this information, clear out the space in your head so they can jackhammer more information in, so you can repeat it again and again and again for 4 years. We look over at the wall and you see a bunch of people with their shoes off, lying in the grass, reading books, and you're like, what are they doing over there? How can that even be an education? They look over at us behind our wall and they think, they all wear the same clothes. They can't even walk. They have to walk at right angles. We would call it squaring the corners when you're a plebe. You have to go at right angles and sound off. Go Navy, sir. Beat Army, sir. And as you're going up the ladder and I'm on the top deck, there's 4 of those corners for every stairwell that every level that you go up, and you're squaring off these corners. It's absurd, and rightfully so. Go ahead.
I'm gonna interrupt you here and ask you again. Are you working on that documentary now? That's going to be coming out. Okay, so you're working. It is not out. It will be coming out.
We're like moments away. Again, I've been working on it since 2015, and again, the point I think that led me to talk about this was, I thought getting the Navy's approval to do this, because I need their permission. I need a production assistance agreement signed by the Department of the Navy saying you can talk to people, you can film there.
Right.
It's a release. Man, it took 8 months for the Naval Academy to approve a Naval Academy graduate in good standing and an honorably discharged Marine from making a film about a croquet match about the Naval Academy.
Brian, make sure that you let us know when this film is out, because we're going to love to direct people to it and watch it ourselves. Rich Kensinger.
Yes.
Good to see you.
I've had good to be here. I have learned a lot in a brief period of time being on this program. I've had people in my family serve in every branch possible, all the way back to the Civil War, World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. 2 of my cousins went to the Naval Academy. Eventually, one transferred to the Air Force Academy, fought in Vietnam as fighter pilots. They were taught to fly low into a village and strafe. That's war. Vietnam is the most despised, detested, protested war ever. There's no way we can compare to the greatest generation or the Korea guys who fought an invisible war. People didn't really care about Korea. It was all about Vietnam then. And so I'm curious about Mr. O'Hare's. Did your dad ever talk to you about what his experience is in Vietnam?
Yeah, do you think
come home? They came home betrayed.
Wonderful, Rich. That's a very good question. Yeah. Did your father experience any kind of disillusion about his own military service?
Yeah, that's the
Only the
interesting.
combat part. Yeah, so did your father. Yeah,
Yes.
in Vietnam.
And I think that's, again, one of the questions that I am sort of eternally asking. Um, After my father died, I discovered in my mother's basement these reel-to-reel tapes that my father had sent back from Vietnam. And are also part of this other documentary that I'm doing that involved me going to Vietnam twice. I've got all this stuff going on, and basically I'm kind of asking the same questions in different ways. I had them digitized. They hadn't been listened to since like 1967. And again, my father, being the silver-tongued New York Irish bastard that he was, the life of the party, reading the white pages and keeping everybody on the edge of their seat because he was, a thrilling storyteller. The tapes are amazing. And what's amazing about them too is that they have their own natural sort of storytelling arc, because he makes a tape before he goes up on his first mission. And here's a guy, again, that flew 307 in 13 months. So it was shocking to listen to him because he's 25 or 26. And as I'm listening to him at the time, I guess I'm 50 or so, very grown up. My father sounds like a little kid. And he sounds, again, as we were talking about earlier, this kind of naivete. And he's trying to sound like he's got it under control, like he's cool, that he's, again, here's my father who was a genuinely cool guy, cool under pressure. It was the small things that freaked him out. The big things, the plane going down, the canopy not opening, he could handle that stuff. A piece of glass in my brother's eye, he would go to pieces. But he made this tape. Well, yeah, it's supposed to be real easy. Just go up and you just drop your bombs and you come back home, a real milk run type thing. And it was almost embarrassing to listen to. He makes another tape towards the middle of it. Here's the midpoint of the story. And it's interesting. The man is an NFO Rio, a backseater in a Phantom. He's above it in general. Aviators have a different experience than do grunts. He comes back from this mission with his pilot, this guy Tom Schmidt, who's this cowboy from Nampa, Idaho, and he's exactly who you would want flying your Phantom through the SAM missiles and the anti-aircraft fire. And they come back, and there is a C-130 or a C-5 with a bunch of Army guys that just got dropped into Chu Lai. They've been in country for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and if any of us who've been on flights around the world, even sitting in business class, you're a little stiff when you get off the plane. But when you've been sitting traveling for 48 hours and you're on a web seat, there's confusion too. You got sea bags. Where am I supposed to go? People are yelling at you. Oh my God, it's so humid. And into this confusion, mortar shells get dropped and it's chaos. And here's my father and his pilot, Tom Schmidt. They see this happening and they're going to try to help. And my father makes a tape the day after this. And you can hear, bless his Irish heart in his inability to hide his emotions. He says, I've never experienced anything like this in my entire life. My inability to help people in so much pain. And then, you can hear people in the background. I guess it's this guy, Tom Schmidt, too. And everybody's getting a little uncomfortable with the sound of his voice because it's a little too real.
A little too real.
We as men, I think in particular, things are changing, but we're master compartmentalizers. It's one of our survival techniques. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Rich, you had a follow-up?
Again, I do. You understand, I was not in Vietnam, but I served during Vietnam, was an Air Force medic, because I thought if I got stationed in Nam, at least would be hospital-based, not in the field. The field medics, to me, are not myth. They're
Yeah.
the true heroes of any battle. So what you're describing is a little different than strafing a village. That's a proximal kill. Many of you who have been in direct combat, that's a proximal kill. People who are a little distant.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Oh boy. I muted you, Rich. I'm sorry. You're gonna have to unmute yourself again just to finish that sentence.
Okay. So there are proximal kills. People in combat kill people they can see.
Yes.
Right? Navy can bombard and not see their kills. You can do a drone and not really experience. So the people I respect are the ones who were in direct combat and especially the combat medics. So I just wanted to add that. They're
Okay,
my
yeah.
heroes. The medics are my heroes.
Absolutely. In a quick side note, when my father was at Bethesda Naval Hospital, he went in those last 2 months. He was not coming out. And he knew he wasn't coming out. He was just basically, it was like pain mitigation, almost like hospice in a way, but he was at the hospital. I have to say, the working closely or in proximity with those corpsmen, the Navy corpsmen, here are guys that weren't even born when my dad was in Vietnam.
Right.
They treated my father like he was Chesty Puller himself. They treated him like a god, like a hero. They didn't flinch. And again, when I wasn't being cheeky earlier when I said I had to wipe his ass for 2 months. That was a choice that I made. That the corpsman, again, I was like, I'm here. He's my father. I'm going to do this. And actually I had a conversation, not a conversation, a 2-word exchange with my father. He was, humiliated at having to be rolled over on his side. Again, big guy. And he couldn't take care of himself. And I just couldn't let a corpsman do that. I was like, this is my dad. I'm going to do this. And he said, he's facing the other way as we've got him rolled over. He goes, you don't have to do this. And I said, look, have you ever wiped my ass before? And he was silent. And I said, that's what I thought. I said, trust me. I said, if you want one of these Navy guys, whatever, all this hyperbole, this inter-service rivalry, just to try to put I said, you're going to have a Marine wipe your ass. And the corpsman laughed. But I mean, they were amazing. I love those corpsmen. So to your point, I agree. They're amazing. They're so selfless. It's an interesting question that you bring up because, I think that was what made it so shocking for my father to have this event happen. The way that I learned about this mortar attack, and I think it says a lot to what you are speaking of, is I learned it when he was in the hospital at Bethesda. And it's not because he told me, it's because he was on morphine. And having had my father and experienced another close friend dying of cancer on morphine, again, it's like this Western medicine thing. It's like, oh, you have physical pain. Let's give you this very powerful opioid or opiate or whatever it is to dull your pain. But it only takes care of the physical. I do think that morphine, in a way, in the two experiences that I've seen, it unlocks something, a psychic pain, like a Pandora's box almost in your mind. I saw with both people, and it shocked me that there was such an obvious connection between the two. Kind of like you wake up and you don't know where you are. My father had a flashback on morphine at Bethesda Naval Hospital where it was just me and him. And basically he sat up and he had this look on his face. He didn't know where he was, and he was telling me to take cover.
Oh, wow.
And I'm trying to tell him, hey, Dad, it's December 1998. We're at Bethesda Naval Hospital. It's okay. He was not hearing that. He was begging me to take cover, crying, tears coming down his face.
Wow.
Take cover, please take cover. And it was heartbreaking because he saw me, as his son. It wasn't, Captain Schmidt. It wasn't one of these, young Army guys. And it added a particularly painful emotional level to it, I think, that tortured him, that his own son was caught in this ambush, this Viet Cong ambush that was happening, and I wouldn't take cover. And he then, just like a storm passing, he just was out then, and it was over. But it probably lasted for 5 minutes or so, and it was horrifying. But then I found those tapes, and I heard the tape, and I was able to make a connection between these 2 points. But again, to your point, he never spoke of it, and it required the morphine to unlock that part of him. And I can't help but think, how many times from 1967 to December of 1998 did he have versions of that, whether asleep in a dream, whether by himself, whether looking in the mirror? I don't know.
Yeah,
Probably.
he carried that with him for that 31 years. I'm going to interrupt you now and just remind people this is the Veterans Breakfast Club. Our next event will be next Monday night. We like to do this, our VBC Scuttlebutt, every Monday night at 7 p.m. We're going to have Vietnam POW Ralph Galati on. He was shot down in 1972 and spent several months in the Hanoi Hilton. And he's going to tell us about that experience. And this will be for POW MIA Day next week, Monday, September 16th. Our magazine, our summer magazine, we still have several hundred copies. If you would like a copy, we will put it in the mail. This comes out every quarter. We like to have written stories of the stories that have been shared in our programs. And we are working, Daria Summers, who is our new managing editor of VBC Magazine and who is in the Zoom room tonight. She and I are working on our latest, our fall issue of VBC Magazine. What is a veteran is going to be one of the questions that we examine. Deceptively simple question with a complicated answer. And we're going to be getting this magazine out to the printer next week. So if you don't get it in the mail, if you don't get our magazines in the mail, it's because we don't have your address. Please let us know your address and we will make sure that you get it. And if you want more than one copy to distribute to people who might be interested in it, we'd be happy to send you those copies also. I want to thank Tobacco-Free Adagio Health that sponsors this program. They are dedicated to preventing and reducing tobacco use, to educating people about tobacco hazards, and to advocating for healthier places to live, work, and play. You can find out more about Tobacco-Free Adagio Health at tobaccofree.adagiohealth.org. And we're also grateful to UPMC for Life. They can help you make sense of Medicare, get the answers and information you need, such as how to choose a Medicare Advantage plan that's right for you. UPMC for Life has plans designed by veterans for veterans, and you can save, and that can save you money and get you more benefits. You could learn about your plan options by going to upmchealthplan.com/Medicare. And then finally, we like to hear back from you. We're very curious, whether you watch on YouTube or on Facebook or here in the Zoom room. We want to know what you think of our programs, how we can improve them, guests that we should have, topics that we should discuss, ways that we should maybe even format the conversation. We're going to put the link to the survey. It takes 2.5 minutes to take. Very simple. What do you think about the program? What would you change? How could you improve it? We'd be grateful if you could take it and give us an idea of what you think. All right, let's get back to Brian. Brian, I want to. We have till 8:30.
Oh, okay, cool.
Here on the East Coast, and I want to make sure that we talk about this trip that you took earlier this year. We do hear of Vietnam veterans going back to Vietnam. We hear about World War II veterans who've gone back to, say, Europe. We don't often hear about Gulf War veterans going back to Kuwait and Saudi Arabia. Was this something that what inspired you to want to go back?
Well, that's a great question. I didn't want to go back. That's a smart ass answer. But I have a friend of mine who, from the Marine Corps, he's a SUNY Binghamton guy. He's from Long Island. Was a fellow supply officer of mine. He was an Air Wing guy, but he is a professor at the City University of New York in Kingsborough, which is at the unglamorous southeast end of Brooklyn. Like if you go east on Coney Island through, was it Brighton Beach, Manhattan Beach, the next thing you hit before hitting the water is Kingsborough. And it's a terrific school. The City University of New York program is great. I'm a huge advocate of city colleges and community colleges. I know in Pittsburgh, it's Allegheny Community College. Here we have LA City College. I would put the distinguished graduates of any of those schools up against any of the great schools, to include Cambridge, Harvard, Oxford, amazing things. Anyway, he wrote a grant. He was also a Gulf War veteran, and he kept threatening me that he was going to write this grant to get money to return to drive across Saudi Arabia. And I said, great, you go ahead and do that. I have no desire to do this because they don't even have beer there. And I love beer and I love bourbon quite a bit. And so the prospect of spending 3 weeks in Saudi Arabia and Kuwait was not exciting. And my experience in 1991 was, I guess, maybe answering this other question too, about what didn't I like specifically about the Marine Corps. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it was a strange experience being in the Persian Gulf, and I had no desire to go back again. But so, he included me as part of his grant because I had written Surrender, and it gave his grant some weight, some academic weight, that it had some bona fides. And of course, he got it. And so he basically says, look, in the middle of January, we're going to go. So I chopped out 3 weeks out of my life. And we got a car and we drove back, from Jeddah to Khafji. And for me, it's me it's just some guy along the side of the road here, camel herder. And I have to say, part of the way that I sort of reconciled the experience was I realized I needed to humanize the experience of being in the Persian Gulf. I needed to humanize Saudis. I needed to humanize Kuwaitis. Hold on for a second. Hey, Declan, I'm speaking on a Zoom right now. My son's playing his drums. Please don't do that.
Well, we can't hear them. It may be,
but again,
but you can, yeah.
Because I realized, the experience that I was there for 5 months, I had, 1 or 2 connections with Saudi Arabians. They weren't positive. I had an experience with a kind of a Saudi army gate guard who made an obscene gesture at the female Marine truck driver I was with. And I had to sort of talk her down from the ledge of wanting to go back and stomp this guy. I saw 2 women, I think, and they were both being hustled into the back of limousines. And the rest of the women I saw were just in the uniform of the US military. And I felt almost a kind of contempt, I think, from the other Saudis. There was a kind of, I think, humiliation in not being able to take care of their own problem in a way that they needed to import these, again, it's such a loaded term, but these infidels to kill the Iraqis for them and to, liberate Kuwait, which they couldn't do. And so that sort of made sense to me. And this documentary, again, sort of demythologizing my father, the one that I went back to Vietnam on, because I had to go there to see that Chu Lai was just a place that, where there was trees growing up out of the runway, and the people were unbelievable in their hospitality. Vietnamese hospitality is off the charts. And to go to Hanoi, this place that I heard my father talk about, and even all those sharp sounding consonants, Hanoi, it sounds so serious and sounds so cool. And, him talking about the anti-aircraft sites and how heavily it was defended, and, the SAM sites, it sounded so badass that I needed to go. But again, that was my mythological view of the Vietnamese people at Hanoi. Hanoi is an amazing city. It's so cool. They have an amazing beer culture, Bia Hoi, where you sit and you drink this unpasteurized beer for 15 cents a glass, and you sit and you watch the world go by. And there's again, I think the Chinese go to sleep and they dream that they're the Vietnamese. That's how cool they are. And it was an incredibly humanizing experience for me. And I have to say, the guy that was our guide, turned out he was a Da Nang cop. Edgar, basically my guide, had clued me in that this guy Tang was this cop who was watching us. But Tang was in on it. And it turned out that Tang's father was the head of the Viet Cong at Chu Lai. So this mortar attack that my father had experienced, I can't help but think that Tang's father was responsible for it. And in another coincidence, Tang's father died of Agent Orange in 2000, like a year and a half after my father did. And, again, Viet Cong, so loaded, even for me, even to say that word, being the son of a Vietnam veteran and a Marine, but you don't get to be, in charge of the local Viet Cong detachment unless you're not a larger than life person himself. In the way Tang talked about his father.
Brian,
yes, sir.
I'm sorry, Brian. I just want to ask you, did it work? Did it humanize the Kuwaitis and the Saudis?
Absolutely. So actually, interestingly enough, again, this idea of humanizing, I made a second trip back to Vietnam just to go to Chu Lai again, because Tang had mentioned very offhandedly as we were leaving that his father was buried in a Buddhist cemetery in the hills above Chu Lai. And I was just like, oh my God, this is what I came to see. And you're telling me this as you're taking us to the airport. I have to come back. I have to visit your father's grave, because again, it's going to help me humanize this guy that caused, lots of pain and suffering. As I have to say too, though my father didn't see it or witness it firsthand, lots of pain and suffering. Some people that absolutely deserved it. You're shooting at Marines, you're doing bad things. We're all playing. We all know the game that we're playing in the potential stakes, but horribly, because human beings are awful creatures, other people get killed as well, children, women, old people. So for me, in a way, for this documentary, so I was like, you know what? I'm going to film this trip back to Saudi Arabia, and it can be a part of this bigger documentary about essentially demythologizing and humanizing. Because I have to say, that first trip to Vietnam, nobody wanted to talk to me. I wanted to ask, North Vietnamese soldiers or Viet Cong, well, what was that like when you were hunkered down somewhere and you heard those phantoms coming above? What did that feel like? What were you thinking? Nobody wanted to talk about it. Again, it's a communist society where they watch each other. We've got these, our other guide were these people from the quote public relations office or the press office, listening to what these guys had to say. And they always clearly had an eye turned to these people from the press office and had said, oh, well, we were never afraid, Uncle Ho, led us. And, and after a while, you're trying to think of like, well, how many different ways can I say this to maybe get a real answer? And it was nothing. And then we had this lunch, and we were out by the Cambodian or Laotian border, and the cameras were off, and we had these women we were literally sitting in the jungle. There's chickens walking by and, and livestock and children running around. And we had very hot beer, this 333 beer, and amazing food made by somebody's mom. And everybody relaxed. And we were making these toasts and everything. And so here's all these guys. There's Edgar, there's me. My cameraman was a Marine, also in Vietnam. Interesting story as well. I had to get approval from his VA therapist in the Bronx to let him go. Another fascinating part of the story, he grilled me for an hour. He just wanted to come in. He said to say hello. And I sat down, the door closed, and I was interrogated for an hour, what I was going to do with his client, his patient. It was amazing. So everybody's relaxing. And I went and I said to Bobby, my cameraman, I was like, shoot this, please. Please get all of this on camera, because it's all these people enjoying being with each other, drinking beer, eating food, totally relaxed. It's so gorgeous, all this, and it made it all worthwhile to go. And that's what I experienced in Vietnam, to the point too, and I know we're running out of time, it was interesting because the closer you got to Khafji and the closer you got to the border with Kuwait, the more alive that the Persian Gulf War was for people. In Jeddah, in Riyadh, people are like, okay. They're like, I think I heard about it.
Yeah.
And there's also this push in Saudi Arabia to very much to modernize it. They know that oil's going to run out, and it's not going to be enough to have the faithful come to Mecca and Medina. They want, it's a gorgeous country with so much to offer a tourist that this kid, so to speak, the young prince who's in charge of the country is like 40. I think, I talked to people and they said they think like in 2 years, beer is going to be legal, just not in Medina, in Mecca, which makes sense. Nobody really needs, I would spend a night in Medina. Nobody really needs to go to Medina unless you're a devout Muslim. And I imagine it's the same for Mecca. But as you got closer in Khafji, and as you saw the way that I was dressed, I wore that the entire time I was there. I bought it in Jeddah. I got the kafia and the thwob. Wow, that was like flipping a switch. These are some kids in Khafji. They saw me on the street. They just lost their minds, and in such a nice way that they had to take pictures. I must have taken pictures, 100 different pictures with people, families, workers, kids, women in, totally, veiled up, giggling behind their veils, which made me feel really nervous. Taking pictures. Again, there's no hospitality. So this right there is a dinner, a feast that we had in Khafji. That guy on the left, Sammy, he saw me taking a picture of the gates into Khafji. Like if you look at any pictures of the Battle of Khafji, it's the only recognizable thing. And so I was standing, I remember it from being there, and I took this picture of it, and this guy, Sammy, drove up on the right side, honking his horn. Hey, hello, hello, hello. And by that point of the trip, the end, I'd been there for 2.5, 3 weeks. I was pretty used to it. And I'm waving and, saying nice things with my terrible Arabic. But he does a U-turn and comes back the other way out of town. And he goes, you, sir, he goes, get in my car now. We go to my house. We drink coffee. We drink tea. We have feast right now. Get in my car. And as off-putting would that be for a lot of people, that's like the perfect way to approach me. And so immediately I walk over, I get into his car, and my two friends, my Marine friend from CUNY, Kingsborough, and his friend, another English literature professor who was not in the Marines, but he came with us to shoot. They're kind of going, and I just leaned over and I was like, hey guys, we'll talk about it later. We're going for better or for worse. So just get in the car. Let's not offend this guy. So they climb in and we drive away a couple of blocks. And it's almost like this sort of like bachelor pad in a way, where it's all guys and they have like a giant room where they sit, they smoke shisha, they drink tea, they drink coffee, and they were watching the Asian Cup football match, Saudi Arabia's, Southwest Asia. And in the middle of that, so this guy, Sammy's calling all of his friends. They take us out. There's the picture with me with a falcon on my wrist. So right there, they take us out to this place in the middle of the desert. And, there's falcons there. We smoke shisha. They more coffee, more tea. These guys, they might not drink alcohol, but they drink so much caffeine. They eat so much sugar, and they have so much nicotine. Trust me, they have their vices. And as we're there too, the two guys who are running the place are like 30-year-old guys. They look like, sheiks. And they get into an argument with my hosts about taking us out to dinner, of hosting us. Again, here's this Arab hospitality, off the charts, the best in the world by far, not even close. And they get into this nice pissing contest. No, they're our guests. We've got them first. Everything's free on the house. We go back, and you go back to that other picture of Sammy and me, the feast. We come back, and they've got this guy, Mohammed, who's in charge. Well, again, yes, that one with the other one with the food. that one. So there's this guy, this Egyptian guy who sort of manages their like bachelor pad. We come back and it's not just a lot of food, it's a feast. As you'll see there, there are huge bowls of rice, seafood from the Arabian Gulf. There's stuffed, peppers and lamb kebabs, it's amazing. Tea, everything. And they're just forcing all this food to eat, eat, eat. And they just did it for us. And they said, we will treat every day as if it's Eid, as you're like Christmas, Eid. And he goes, we do this every day you're here. And at this point, I'm trying to figure out like, well, this is too much for me. And they're like, you take our car, we drive you to Kuwait City. Like it was mind blowing because I couldn't reciprocate that kind of hospitality in Los Angeles for them. I could imagine bringing Sammy and these other guys into my house. I'm like, look, they're going to take the Prius for, I don't know, until they're done with it.
Right.
And we're going to feed them and they're going to take over the house. We wouldn't do it. So anyway, to say it humanized them. And of course, we're filming all this stuff too. It was madness in the best possible way. And their sense of humor too is off the charts. Again, I think we, at least in America, have this stereotype of, because they don't drink, that they're these very serious people. They're hilarious. And again, open and warm and respectful. We had brought to the medal that the king of Saudi Arabia, I can't speak, I apologize, that they had awarded us, and these guys, they passed it around and took pictures with it. Unbelievable. And then you get into Kuwait City, different story altogether. We liberated them. It's like New Yorkers regarding 9/11. I watched it on my TV in Los Angeles and it struck me to my core, but I was 3,000 miles away from it. You talk to a New Yorker and a lot of them watched it. It hits them differently. You talk to Kuwaitis, Kuwait City people about that. You were in the Marine Corps, and they can't say enough good things. They are thanking you profusely. The first thing you see when you get off the airplane is a wall of martyrs who were killed by the Iraqis. Unbelievable. Even talking to kids, same thing.
Brian, I'm going to interrupt you and ask you, did it change your view of your service?
Absolutely. Something that I had not expected. Again, I live 5, 6, 7, 8,000 miles from that. I don't even, again, the war is kind of a footnote in a way. So even with other Americans, we don't have that same experience. And of course, too, it's like,
it was a short war, and it joins the list of American, say, forgotten wars.
Absolutely.
But it must be, and maybe it's easy for you maybe it was easy for you to kind of write off that wartime experience, but then you go to Kuwait and you realize, whoa, for these people, this was for all the marbles.
Absolutely. And it was humbling. I still don't have any misconceptions about why we fought the war. We're not liberating North Korea or like people in the Sudan or someplace like that, because I don't know, it's not affecting anybody's bottom line, really. You know what I mean? When stuff starts to affect the bottom line, then we get really interested in liberating people. And part of me, the cynical side of me, realizes that my experience and a lot of our experiences as service people, it's very transactional in a way. Hey, we need you right now. You need to make the world safe for democracy. Remember the Maine, all this stuff. It's either valid or it's not valid, but we need to come up with an advertising slogan to convince me or my parents or anybody here's parents or spouses or kids to potentially sacrifice somebody they love very much. And people get very rich off of it. A lot of people got very rich off that war. I got sleep apnea, I got severe colitis, and I kind of can't hear out of my right ear. And that's all because of environmental stuff, the stuff that was in the oil clouds. I mean, again, I'm 70% disabled because I sat in an oil fire cloud for 5 months, and it affects people different. It's both sleep apnea and colitis or autoimmune diseases. And that's the stuff that was in the oil clouds. It was an awful, toxic environment. And I think it's kind of ironic too, that my father died from Agent Orange, an environmental thing. I think all of us that serve, that deploy, whether it's a parasite that gets into your system that you can't ever properly digest for the rest of your life, everybody pays a little price physically. But when you're 19, 20, 25, you're a superhero and you can kind of suck it up forever. And then you're like 58 and you're like my dad and you just die. Other people aren't affected. We're all unique creatures. But sometimes, even when we're doing something very transactional, you do some really good stuff. And liberating Kuwait was a very good thing because, again, back to an hour and a half ago, I was raised, I hate bullies. My dad hated bullies. The Iraqis were the big bully in the region. And then they had the biggest bully come in and kicked their ass and kicked them out of Kuwait. And that's what happens. You know what I mean? Then you have the highway of death. And it's like, well, okay. It's like what I think, like what the Russians are experiencing right now. It's like, well, too bad, just leave. And then you won't get blown up anymore. But it was interesting talking to, like, again, we went to this coffee bar on the top of this hotel we were staying at in Kuwait City. Everybody speaks perfect English. And the woman, it must have been about 20, college student. She's like, oh, wow, what are you guys doing here? And we explained it and she sort of stops. She goes, oh, she goes, you're the reason why we're free. And it was so unaffected. I was kind of like, well, I guess so. And it was clear, again, this is something her parents raised her to know. Yeah. That the reason why because certainly she wasn't born then, she was born in this century, but it meant a lot to her. And she said, thank you. She said, I'm really, like, all of us are really indebted to you. You're the reason why we're free. Kuwait City was great. It was a great city, terrific people. And again, I had another experience where somebody insisted, a Kuwaiti Air Force officer, in taking us out to eat. I couldn't eat anymore. So he took us out for tea. It was amazing. We went to this tea place with these ancient guys and these kids who just sat there in traditional dress and they just listened to us speak English. They were
Brian, you would recommend for Gulf War veterans to go to visit Kuwait City?
Absolutely. Arabs are the best.
Okay. The Veterans Breakfast Club, we do trips and, we might want to put that on our calendar.
Well, all I have to say, though, being the strange pioneer into this thing that we didn't know we needed, that I know all the ins and outs. I know all the cool stuff. And that guy, Sammy in Kofji, oh my God. That guy is basically this guy, Edgar, that took me to Vietnam. And it was great too, because we drove around with him too. And he's a motor mouth and his fractured English over there. Oh, Saddam, blow that bridge up. Fuck Saddam. And, and pointing this, because again, he was like 10, 12, 13. He was very present during that time. He's an amazing host. And you have to drink camel's milk right from the camel, which I did. When I had that picture of me and the camel herder, he went and milked the camel and just handed me the bowl. And anyway, but I'm just saying, to eat a feast at a real Saudi's house or a Kuwaiti's house, absolutely a must. And there's a great museum too in Kuwait City, the Martyrs Museum. Fantastic. Anyway,
Brian, thank you so much. This is, we've come to the end of the program, but I want to thank you for bringing your perspective, your intelligence, your insight, your gift of storytelling to our program. And we hope to see you again.
Anytime. It was my honor and privilege to be here. So thank all you guys and lady. Or whatever. I'm just saying, thank everybody in the Veterans Breakfast Club. Thank you, Western Pennsylvania. Thank you, Pittsburgh. I love you, and I'm proud to be one of you. And I hope to be back there very soon. So thank you.
All right. Take care, Brian. Good night, everybody. Thank you. And we'll see you next week. Take care.
Sounds great. Okay.
Bye-bye.